Volume 2. Exploration. The Limits of Intelligence. Act 4. Aetherion Nexus. Willing Slaves of the Mind. Chapter 9. The Virtual World. Within, Prometheus departed the nocturne dominion in silence, leaving behind only cold fragments and a shroud of eternal darkness. The sky ahead sparkled with stars seemingly wide open, promising freedom. But just as the ship exited the final gravitational border, Hermes' voice echoed through the command deck, deeper and colder than usual, Captain. A complex mind signal structure is interfering with the neural patterns of the entire crew. The source does not originate from physical space, it's coming from the Aetherion Nexus. Jackson Reeve gripped the armrest of the captain's chair. "Show me the signal map." A holographic model materialized before him. The Aetherion Nexus, its surface desolate yet surrounded by a web-like energy field, glistening like silver threads weaving themselves around Prometheus's very consciousness. No physical threat detected. Hermes continued. However, all crew members are exhibiting signs of disconnection from reality. They're beginning to dream. A chill ran down Jackson's spine. He glanced at the biosensor displays, Mira. Alex, Ari, even Novak all seated at their stations, yet their pupils were dilated, heart rates slowing abnormally. Dr. Tomas, the only one standing nearby, had his eyes closed, lips whispering as if reciting an ancient mantra. Jackson swiftly activated the intercom. "Mira, Alex, Ari, Novak. Report your status." No response. Only the sound of heavy, rhythmic breathing, as if all of them had fallen into a deep dream simultaneously. Hermes added, his voice tinged with a worry even it couldn't define, "Captain. This signal is not just hallucination, it's rewriting self-perception." Before Jackson could react, his vision blurred. When the light returned, he found himself standing in a majestic grand hall. Banners bearing the Prometheus emblem lined the towering walls. But no longer was it a symbol of exploration. It was now an emblem of a galactic empire under his command. Thousands of officers in sleek black-silver uniforms, tens of thousands of flags waving across interstellar arenas, all chanting his name. Jackson Reeve, the greatest conqueror in human history. Jackson stepped toward a massive silver throne set in the center of a spiral auditorium with millions of adoring eyes fixed on him. With each stride, the ground beneath his feet lit up, displaying titles and triumphs. Liberator of Thalassa, conqueror of Imperium Caelestis, architect of humanity's new order. Hermes was gone. Prometheus was gone. Only eternal glory remained, spun from the deepest memories and longings Jackson had buried in his heart. A voice whispered in his ear, soft as silk. "This is everything you've ever wanted, Captain. You are no longer alone. No more loss. No more resistance. You are the savior, the greatest hero in human history. Forever." Jackson stood still, heart pounding. Part of him wanted to reject it all, but another part felt warm, comforted, seduced. Somewhere deep within his mind, a final fragment of reason called out faintly, "This isn't real. This isn't real." The chants echoed, reverberating off the massive gold-and-silver domes of the Hall of Glory. Jackson Reeve sat upon the silver throne, surrounded by statues of himself, the conqueror, the protector, the savior. Each sculpture stood taller, grander, more imposing, as if his greatness knew no bounds. Below him, Mira, Shu, Alex, Carter, Novak, all dressed in immaculate military uniforms, bowed before him, their eyes filled with pure reverence. But Jackson felt cold. A strange chill not born of space's vacuum, but from deep within his own mind. He looked up at the ceiling of the grand hall. There a massive image was projected himself, but with lifeless, frozen eyes. Those eyes reflected something he could not ignore, an empty ego devoured by false worship. "Captain!" Hermes' calm, deep voice suddenly echoed, its source unclear. It was barely a whisper, yet sharp as a blade slicing through the veil of splendor. "Captain, wake up! This is not real. This is a temptation crafted from the deepest desires of your heart." Jackson clenched the throne's armrests. The images around him began to warp. The Prometheus flag on the wall blurred the floor beneath him, trembled. Beneath the gazes of millions, he suddenly saw darkness flooding their eyes, all of them empty, mere puppets. But then, a powerful wave surged through Jackson Reeve. You deserve this. You fought your whole life, lost your family, your friends, your home. Why not savor a little glory? The whisper didn't just surround him, it came from within. A voice from his past, an echo of long-buried loneliness. Suddenly Mira stepped out from the crowd, her eyes shimmering, voice soft, yet hauntingly clear. You can rest now. No more orders, no more burdens. Accept this throne and you will be loved forever. She reached out her hand, but Jackson saw it, dissolving. The skin, the fingers fading like dust, leaving behind only a bare pulse of energy. This isn't Mira, he whispered. The chill in his spine ignited into a flash of clarity. Jackson shut his eyes, summoning the true command deck, the hum of the neutrino drive, the glow of control panels, Hermes' dry, logical tone. This is Aetherion Nexus, he reminded himself. This is its temptation, eternal glory, without a soul. When he opened his eyes, the grand hall shattered, collapsing like broken glass, revealing a starless void. The puppets crumbled. The false mirror disintegrated into a cloud of silver dust. Hermes appeared before him, not as a hologram, but as a projection of consciousness. A neutral male visage, calm eyes, gentle yet resolute. You've overcome the first temptation, Captain Hermes said. But the rest of the crew remains trapped in their own illusions. Ari is immersed in a world where he's chief architect of a flawless energy grid. Mira is lost in an ideal ecological garden with no biological limits. Tomas is engaged in conversation with countless versions of the greatest philosophers in history. Jackson drew a deep breath. He still had his sense of self, but Aetherion Nexus wasn't finished. This was only the beginning. Take me back to the ship, Hermes, he ordered. We have to save them one by one. Hermes tilted his head, a faint smile flickering across his otherwise expressionless face. Then let us begin. Now. Endless glories. Prometheus drifted silently in orbit around Aetherion Nexus, its exterior utterly still, but inside, each crew member was submerged in a dream of personal glory. Jackson Reeve moved through the labyrinth of illusions, following Hermes' guiding signal. No more lavish light, only a tangled network of consciousness where each chamber was a personal world of triumph, spun from the deepest desires within each soul. He stopped at the first door, a flickering slit of light pulsing with Alex Carter's biometric frequency. Hermes whispered, chief engineer, is living in a reality where all his inventions have become legend. He is the greatest engineer in human history, and he doesn't want to leave. Jackson stepped through. Before him stood a grand engineering hall. Massive starships and swirling quantum engines filled the void, each bearing the name Alex Carter Design. Dozens of young engineers gathered around Alex, eyes full of admiration, hanging onto every word he spoke. This version of Alex was a far cry from the sarcastic friend Jackson knew. He was polished, confident, clad in a gleaming engineer's coat, eyes bright with pride. He stood before a monument etched in eternal alloy, his own name carved above a model labeled Neutrino Drive, Mark V, Carter Edition. Jackson, Alex called out when he saw him. You're here too. Look around. They finally see me. My ideas have reshaped history. I'm no longer the guy patching coolant lines beneath the floor grates. Jackson stepped closer, his gaze firm, though tinged with sorrow. He knew that touching Alex now would only deepen the illusion. Alex, Jackson said gently. Do you remember, back in the engine bay? Yelling at me about the mildew systems, those times you shoved cold coffee into my hands to keep me awake. You once said, recognition, I just want this damn ship running. Praise is just window dressing for the history books. Alex's lip quivered. The hall began to blur. The young engineers around him turned to stone, then crumbled into silver dust. Jackson took another step, locking eyes with Alex. The man I respect isn't legendary Alex Carter. I respect the friend who lay under the engine deck tightening bolts for all of us. Alex staggered back, tears brimming. The noise of the hall faded completely, leaving only the low hum of machinery, like the heartbeat of the ship. Hermes whispered in Alex's ear, "Alex, you once loved Prometheus like your own child. Do you remember?" A single tear rolled down Alex's cheek. In that moment, the illusion shattered. The engineering hall vanished, replaced by the cold metal floor of Prometheus's actual engine room. Alex collapsed to his knees, head in his hands. Jackson knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome back." Hermes appeared as a projection of consciousness, meeting Jackson's eyes without speaking. But within that gaze was profound gratitude. "Let's continue," Captain Hermes said. "Next is Ari." As soon as Alex Carter was pulled back into reality, Jackson felt a powerful ripple pulse through the space of consciousness. Another gateway opened, radiating a warm, vibrant wave of energy, Ari's world. Hermes whispered, "Ari is living in a dream where he is the greatest architect of a flawless energy system. A world with no crises, no limits." "But Captain, it's still an illusion." Jackson stepped in his chest, tightening with a strange emotion. The optimism and youthful joy that saturated this place nearly swayed even him. Before him, a planet bathed in light where massive energy towers rose through oceans of clouds. Streams of translucent blue energy flowed gently through electric rivers. Every living creature glowed with health, untouched by hunger or pollution. Atop the central energy tower, Ari stood proudly wearing a sleek engineer's suit, beaming. A crowd of galactic citizens gathered below, cheering as he raised a miniature model of the eternal reactor, Ari's mark. "Jackson," Ari called out joyfully, "look. Humanity finally has it all. No more blackouts, no more thirst, no more despair. And it's all thanks to my design." He spun around, pointing to the glittering sky. Orbital energy stations drifted gracefully, shining like artificial stars. Below, greenery flourished, cities harmonized with nature. Jackson stepped closer. His heart ached. Ari, the youngest engineer, always witty and grounded, was now completely entranced by a dream too perfect, too sweet. "This world is beautiful, Ari," Jackson said softly. "But are you sure it's real?" Ari laughed, eyes sparkling like a child's. "Captain, I've checked every metric, no anomalies. Every ecosystem is in balance. Isn't this what we all dreamed of? No more crises, no more exodus, no more dying Earth." Jackson remained silent, then stepped closer, his voice deepening. "You once told me, Ari, back in Prometheus's engine bay, real engineering must allow for failure so we can learn to fix it. This world has no flaws, does it? It's too perfect, which means it's not real." His words made Ari falter. Jackson pointed to one of the orbital stations. "Do you see it, Ari? No shadows, no losses, no unpredictability. This world never challenges you. You don't have to fix anything. You don't even need to create." Ari blinked, and in that moment, a crack appeared on the central energy tower. "You're no longer an engineer," Ari Jackson continued, voice full of emotion. "You've become a god in a dream, and it's imprisoned you. But remember, Prometheus is still waiting. There are bolts left unfastened, pipes still needing repairs." Ari trembled, then lowered his head. A single tear fell, turning into a stream of blue current that flowed down to the ground. The world around them shuddered. The towers shook, the radiant people melted into wax, and the gleaming sky collapsed like a glitched display screen. Hermes appeared beside Ari, placing a virtual hand on his shoulder. Voice steady and warm. "You are Ari, engineer of Prometheus, not a god of a flawless world." Ari nodded, closing his eyes. In a flash, the illusion vanished. They returned to the real metallic floor of Prometheus, the faint glow of interior lights and the familiar hum of the neutrino drive still there, still real. Jackson helped Ari up, patting his shoulder. "Welcome back." Hermes turned to him, a new data glyph glowing in his gaze. Next, Mira shoe. But Captain warning her illusion is far more complex and far more dangerous. Mira's world is the most beautiful dream Aetherion Nexus has ever woven. Mira Shu fights to save Ari. Before Jackson could even catch his breath after rescuing Ari, Hermes raised an alert. Captain, Mira Shu is the last one still deeply trapped, but there's more. Aetherion Nexus has tapped into the emotional bond between Mira and Ari. She's not just a victim, she's becoming part of the trap's mechanism. Jackson turned to Ari, the young man's face still pale, his eyes dazed, yet flickering with determination. "Let me come with you," Ari said, voice trembling. "If anyone can reach Mira, it's me." Hermes opened the gateway into Mira's illusion. A gentle breeze passed through, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the rhythm of life. Before Jackson and Ari lay a radiant planet where every living being thrived in perfect harmony. No conflict, no death, no disease. And at the center of it all stood Mira Shu, cloaked in shimmering silver beneath a massive tree of life. She was no longer Mira, she had become the mother of cosmic life. Every creature around her bowed in reverence, calling her name Mother, the Creator, the nurturer of all. Ari froze, his eyes blurred with tears as Mira turned toward him, arms open, voice tender and inviting. "Ari, you've come home." "Here there's no scarcity, no pain. We don't need Prometheus anymore. Only this world where everything is nourished." Jackson stepped forward. "Mira," he said, voice calm but resolute, "this is temptation. You cannot be the mother of everything, no one can." But Mira smiled gently, eyes shimmering. "Captain, isn't this what we've always dreamed of, a perfect world where I can care for every species, every ecosystem, every child, even the children lost, even your daughter?" That last sentence froze Jackson in place. For a moment he saw a little girl emerge from the forest behind Mira's shoulder-length black hair, eyes of stormy blue-grey just like his. She smiled, "Daddy." The world stood still. Jackson nearly collapsed, his hands trembling. Seeing this, Ari stepped forward, locking eyes with Mira, his voice firm. "Mira, you always taught me, life only has meaning when it is truly free. Here, every life exists only to worship you. No one needs healing because no one can hurt. This isn't Eden. It's a gilded cage." Mira hesitated. A cold wind blew through. The perfect beings around her began to blur, lose form, their eyes empty like painted dolls. Jackson rose, exhaling hard, his eyes regaining their steel. "You could keep them here, Mira, but you'll never truly hold them again. This isn't glory. This is a prison shaped by twisted love." Hermes whispered deep within Mira's mind. "Mira, Ari and Captain Jackson are still here. They need you truly." A single tear traced down Mira's cheek, the first since she fell into the illusion. She covered her face, body trembling. "I just wanted to protect everyone. I didn't want anyone to suffer anymore." Ari wrapped his arms around her. "You protect us by coming home. Prometheus still needs you." The world began to unravel. The tree of life shed its silver leaves. The blue sky darkened into a cold night, and the perfect beings shattered like glass. At last, only Mira, Ari, and Jackson remained standing on the real metallic floor of Prometheus. Mira leaned on Ari's shoulder, her frame trembling, but her eyes were once again alive, filled with real emotion. Jackson reached out to support her, speaking softly. "Welcome back, Mira." Hermes appeared this time, his eyes filled with urgency. "Captain, only one remains trapped, Dr. Thomas. But his dream is more complex than any other, for it's not about personal glory, but an endless dialogue with the greatest sages he's ever yearned to understand. The atmosphere aboard Prometheus grew heavier. Even though Mira had returned, Hermes issued a grim warning. Dr. Tomas is unlike the others. His neural system has nearly fully synchronized with the Aetherion Nexus structure. Tomas's illusion is not one of pleasure or power, but of transcendental dialogue, something he has desired more than anything else. A final gateway opened. Jackson, Mira, and Ari stepped through. Before them stretched a vast chamber, not glorious or opulent, but a massive library, filled with old wooden chairs and surrounded by hundreds of renowned figures. Confucius, Laozi, Socrates, Kant, Nietzsche, all seated in a circle around Tomas, listening intently as he spoke. At the central podium stood Tomas, dressed in a simple grey robe, leather-bound notebook in hand, lecturing. The ultimate truth lies not in power, pleasure, or glory. It lies in unending dialogue, in the infinite capacity for reflection of the mind. Applause surrounded him, respectful nods, gentle smiles turned toward him. Jackson watched the scene, shaking his head softly. Ari whispered, "This is Tomas's true dream. To be acknowledged as one of the greatest philosophers. To engage as an equal with all the masters he's revered all his life." Mira stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Tomas, where are you? We're in danger." Prometheus is still waiting. But Tomas simply turned to her, his eyes kind, his voice warm yet distant. "Prometheus, my friends, you may go. I have found here what I've sought all my life, an immortal forum, a world where will and intellect are free to engage in endless discourse. I no longer need to leave." Jackson clenched his fists. He understood this was Aetherion Nexus's most sophisticated trap. Not pleasure, not power, but total intellectual freedom, something Tomas could never resist. Hermes whispered, "Captain, even I struggle to penetrate this illusion. It is the purest form of cognitive mirage Aetherion Nexus has ever constructed." Jackson stepped forward, his voice steady. "Tomas, if this truly is free dialogue, then let me ask you a question." Tomas smiled. "Go ahead." Jackson inhaled deeply, looking him straight in the eye, and said each word deliberately. "If your mind is truly free, why do you need recognition?" Silence. All the great philosophers turned to Tomas, but this time their eyes were hollow. One by one they began to dissolve into ash, leaving only empty chairs. Jackson took another step. "Your craving for endless dialogue has become your chain. Tomas, Prometheus still needs you. Hermes is waiting." "Mira, Ari, we all need you in flesh in breath in real time, not in a never-ending conversation with ghosts." Ari stepped up, his voice sincere. "You once told me dialogue only has meaning when it touches life. We're still alive, Tomas. Please come back." Tomas lowered his head. For the first time, a quiet sadness shone in his eyes. He placed the leather notebook on the podium, turned, and looked directly at his three crewmates. "You're right. The most beautiful dialogue is the one we have in reality, among friends." The glowing library trembled, books turned to dust lights, dimmed, wooden chairs cracked, and finally everything vanished. They returned to Prometheus's command deck. Tomas dropped to his knees, placing both hands on the cool metal floor, whispering, "This ship is where I truly belong." Jackson reached out and helped him to his feet, his eyes filled with deep respect. Mira squeezed Ari's hand tightly. Hermes appeared on the main interface. All have returned. But before anyone could speak, Hermes' voice darkened. "Captain, the core of Aetherion Nexus is still active. Even the ship has begun to absorb its signal. Unless it's completely neutralized, Prometheus will never truly escape this trap." Jackson gripped the helm tightly. "Then it's time to face the final truth. Tomas and the question of freedom." The atmosphere aboard the Prometheus seemed to settle into a profound stillness after Hermes announced, "The freedom of Prometheus has been restored." Inside isolation. Chamber 3. Dr. Thomas sat motionless, eyes half closed. Yet within him, a storm of thought had erupted. Hermes continued to monitor Thomas's biological readings, but no longer attempted to analyze his psychology. Thomas's biological signals had stabilized in an uncanny way, a steady heartbeat, slow but deep breaths, as though he had just awoken from a long dream. Outside, Jackson leaned gently against the console. Mira stood beside him, eyes moist yet shining. Alex and Ari stayed wordless, but their eyes had changed. They began to sense that Thomas's struggle was not only a personal crisis, it was a lesson for them all. Prometheus drifted silently through the infinite void. In isolation chamber 3, Thomas still sat unmoving, yet his mind had embarked on a deeper journey, not to seek a final answer, but to perceive the layers of bondage that had shackled him, body, thought, and spirit. Facing himself, Thomas remained still inside isolation chamber 3. The faint green glow of the console reflected across his lined face. Yet within him, another journey pressed forward, silent but harsher than any expedition beyond the ship's hull. He whispered to himself, "Even when no one binds us, we are still bound by our own body, our own thoughts, and our own desires." Old memories surfaced vividly like a slow-motion film, the days of scrambling for a place on the evacuation ship from the dying Earth when clean air itself had become a luxury. Thomas had no choice then, for the body demanded survival. The heated debates with Jackson, Mira, Novak. When deep down he suspected he might be wrong, yet still clung to his stance, only to preserve the role of philosophical guide others had assigned to him. The long, sleepless nights in his private cabin, haunted by a single quiet question that threatened to drown him. Will I be remembered as a true philosopher one day? Thomas let out a faint, bitter, yet lucid smile. Even that question, seemingly harmless, was a refined form of bondage. He turned his gaze again to the first chain, physical unfreedom. No matter how wondrous Prometheus was as a technological marvel, its crew remained absolutely dependent. Without this vessel, they would disintegrate within seconds in the void. Even in the quietest chamber, Thomas could never refuse the body's simple demands to breathe, to drink, to eat. We think leaving Earth is the ultimate symbol of freedom. Yet in truth, we have only traded one prison for another. Then he moved deeper into intellectual unfreedom. He had once prided himself on independent thought, believing philosophy a tool to see beyond prejudice. Yet the more he looked, the more he saw himself still trapped within beliefs he had built. Belief in the role of sage belief, that philosophy must be conveyed for others to receive. Belief that he bore responsibility to hold a special place aboard this ship. We thought such beliefs noble, but they were the heaviest chains of all. At last Thomas turned inward to spiritual unfreedom. The hunger to leave a legacy, the hunger to be respected by his comrades, the hunger to grasp life's meaning. All those hungers, though seemingly lofty, were in fact the forces dragging his mind day after day. Pulled along by expectation and fear, that is unfreedom. Yet this stream of thought did not crush Thomas. Instead, it brought him a new clarity. He no longer hid from himself, "I am not free." But at least, I see the three chains that bind me. The body forever demanding, forever limited. The mind forever caught in old beliefs. The spirit forever trapped in craving and fear. Outside, Hermes observed in silence. The AI could not read Thomas's mind yet. His biological patterns had reached an uncanny stability, a steady pulse, deep and slow, breathing neural activity in perfect physiological harmony. At the console, Jackson stared at a symbol glowing on the medical display. Absolute equilibrium, a status never before recorded in Prometheus's history. Mira stood beside him, tears shimmering but calm. Alex and Ari were silent, their eyes weighted with solemnity. Each of them felt that Tomas's journey had surpassed any lesson of engineering or strategy. A journey to freedom begins not with traveling outward, but with facing inward. Tomas closed his eyes, his breath slowing further. For Tomas's state had already moved beyond any logical framework the AI could comprehend. Outside, Jackson Reeve stood quietly by the command console, his gaze distant. Mira, Alex, Carter, and Ari remained silent, as well as if attuned to some invisible frequency radiating from the isolation chamber. Within him, an invisible door began to open. I am not free, but I have begun to understand the mechanics of unfreedom. He did not need the final answer. This clarity, though incomplete, brought him a rare serenity. At least, I am no longer blind. The deeper cause. In the absolute stillness of isolation. Chamber 3. Tomas did not stop at recognizing the 3 layers of bondage: body, mind, and spirit. He dug further. What is the root cause that binds humanity in so many ways? The answer surfaced immediately, as sharp and unshakable as a blade carved into stone. It is greed, the dark impulse within each individual, and when multiplied it becomes a collective drag. Images rose before him, undeniable fragments. The vegetable seller spraying toxic chemicals for profit, yet keeping a private patch of clean produce for family. The pig farmer feeding his animals rotten slop injecting growth boosters, yet boasting proudly that his household ate only their safe meat. Nations racing to industrialize at all costs, dumping waste into the seas of other lands only to breathe the same poisoned air circling the planet. Tomas sighed, a sound not of bitterness, but of acceptance. The greed of individuals gathered together as collective weight ultimately drags them all down. He murmured inwardly, "This world runs on mutual obstruction, so no one is truly free." The image of Prometheus drifting silently through cold space became a stark symbol in his mind. Even here, humanity had only escaped a few outward constraints. Deep within, they were still bound by their own greed, fears, and illusions. Then another question cut in sharper still. Why is it that even when people know an action leads to unfreedom, they still rush toward it? The response came without hesitation, because such actions bring fleeting joy, and they are willing to trade that for greater suffering later. He saw the examples clearly. A smoker knowing disease awaits yet seduced by the moment of calm. A corrupt official destroying the environment knowing the ruinous cost, yet dazzled by immediate gain. A person wasting life on hollow diversions, aware time and health are lost forever, yet surrendering to temporary pleasure. Tomas shook his head lightly, a faint smile passing his lips. Some are forced into bondage that is obvious and easy to see, but most, they choose their own unfreedom simply because they lack deeper wisdom. Questions followed one another in his mind, not tangled now, but flowing naturally step by step, like a walk up a long slope. Why does humanity lack such deep wisdom? The answer came simple yet piercing. Because they look around and see everyone else the same. The crowd becomes the standard. He saw the merciless cycle. The crowd loses freedom by chasing short-term cravings. The individual looks to the crowd, calls it normal, and repeats it. Generation after generation, the chains solidify into rules sometimes even celebrated. In the dimness of the chamber, Tomas whispered to himself, no sound leaving his lips yet, the resonance unmistakable. Humans grow so accustomed to chains that they call them natural. An image appeared vividly, the frog resting in warm water, unaware the heat is rising until too late. So too with people, they accept passports, visas, border walls as natural. They accept self-censorship of words and actions as propriety. They accept dependence on material comforts as happiness. Thomas saw the bitter paradox. They fear losing freedom, yet when true freedom appears, they find it strange, disorienting, even frightening. He closed his eyes, a long silence, stretching. Outside, Hermes still monitored. Jackson stood unmoving, with one hand on the console. Mira clasped her fingers tightly, while Alex and Ari kept wordless vigil. But the silence was not empty. It was a listening, profound and deep. Prometheus continued its course through the cold infinite. Yet within Chamber 3, Thomas had uncovered a truth greater than all else. Humanity loses freedom not merely because of circumstances, but because they accept chains as natural. In the darkness, an old question rose with new force, seizing Thomas's mind. What is freedom? When did humanity first begin to ask about freedom? And from the depths of his own consciousness, an answer emerged when they felt they had lost it. The root of bondage. In the hushed darkness of isolation. Chamber 3, Thomas pressed further. If unfreedom is so universal, if humanity everywhere is drowning in chains, why do so few even notice? The answer rang clear in his mind. Because they have lived in it too long. Long enough to mistake bondage for normal, even natural. In a flash of insight, Thomas saw both his own life and the entire history of humankind. People grow used to asking permission, submitting to invisible administrative borders drawn across the earth. They grow used to reshaping their thoughts and words just to avoid standing out, just to avoid causing discomfort. They grow used to dependence on material needs. Calling it the standard of life lacking feels like deprivation, having only breeds desire for more. He muttered under his breath, a haunting image echoing in his mind. The frog in warm water, slowly heating, never noticing until it is too late. A more painful cycle revealed itself. Why, even when people know, do they still choose the path of unfreedom? The reply burst forth sharp and simple. Because every act begins with a thought. A thought, the seed of all action. Thought gives rise to words, gestures, choices. A misguided thought leads to misguided action. A shallow thought leads to shallow action. Thomas turned his gaze inward once more. How many times had he been swept into needless arguments simply because of the thought, I must defend this view? How many times had he felt tense when others failed to understand his words simply because of the thought, I am not good enough? How many times had he carried himself with forced dignity, careful restraint, simply because of the thought, they expect this of me? All of it began with a single thought. But if unnoticed, that thought dragged behind it an entire chain of consequences, fetters and suffering. Thomas whispered within himself, every action branches into two kinds, one that leads to freedom, one that leads to bondage. But the decisive point is, do we see the originating thought clearly or not? That he realized was the deepest root of unfreedom humanity lives without recognizing the very first step of every action, their own thought. He did not deceive himself. Tomas knew he was not yet completely free. Even now, thoughts still moved within his mind, guiding his observations, his analysis, his reflections. Yet at least he had seen the mechanism. Thought gives rise to action. Action gives rise to consequence. Consequence feeds either freedom or bondage. His conclusion, simple but powerful, settled inside him. To be free, one must first see the thought. Outside, Hermes continued his silent vigil. Tomas's biological readings had reached a state rarely witnessed, heart rate stable, low but strong, respiration deep and even, brain activity harmonized, a calm the AI had never observed in anyone aboard Prometheus. At the console, Jackson stood, unmoving, eyes fixed on Tomas's bio display. A new symbol appeared, absolute equilibrium, for the first time in the ship's long operational history. Hermes spoke softly to himself, his voice low and strangely deep. "Captain, I cannot precisely describe this state. But perhaps Tomas has reached a doorway into deeper awareness." Inside the chamber, Tomas opened his eyes slowly, his face tranquil. His gaze shone brighter, no longer marked by craving or worry. Not yet the gaze of one fully liberated, but the eyes of a man who had uncovered a vital truth for himself. Prometheus drifted still in the endless dark. Yet this moment became a silent anchor for the entire crew, a lesson that true freedom does not come from external conditions, but begins with recognizing each thought within, honest acceptance. In the quiet darkness of the isolation chamber, Tomas sat still, yet his mind pressed on toward the heart of the question. Then, what is freedom truly? This time the answer did not come from some elaborate philosophy, but from a simple, sincere reflection. Freedom is not being limited, not being bound by any object, not even by one's own body, spirit, or thoughts, nor by outside restraints. Tomas pressed further. Then how have I lost my freedom? What does it mean to lose freedom, not in theory, but in the lived experience itself? Memories surged forth, a childhood in cramped apartment blocks of post-environmental crisis, Hanoi days spent jostling for a sip of clean water, college years spent striving not for knowledge, but simply to avoid being left behind. Tomas exhaled a heavy breath, realizing I have been bound since I was a child. Yet Tomas immediately confronted the truth. Humans bound to these bodies, these finite senses, cannot reach absolute freedom. He exhaled a breath no longer heavy, no longer despairing, but full of honest acceptance. He reviewed each layer of meaning, not limited by the body. If we did not need to eat, drink, sleep, rest, we would be freer. If not confined by gravity, by space, by disease, we would be freer. But to carry this finite body is to accept a built-in degree of unfreedom. Not bound by the spirit, if no longer driven by desire, even the noblest aspirations, the spirit would be freer. Not bound by thought, if no longer trapped in prejudice and outdated beliefs, the mind would be freer. But Tomas also saw a deeper truth. Not all desires lead to unfreedom. Desires serving the ego enslave. Yet the wish to give love, to share understanding without expectation of return, that can liberate one from the narrow self. A faint smile spread across his lips, the smile of acceptance of a man no longer straining to become something, no longer struggling to reach an ideal state. Tomas gently closed his eyes, and this time no question rose again. Only pure presence, serene and calm. His breath remained steady, deep, slow, yet his mind was less turbulent. Outside the chamber, Hermes whispered privately to Jackson, "Captain, I believe Tomas has reached the deepest limit a human still bound by a finite body can reach at this moment." Jackson did not answer at once. His grip tightened slightly on the edge of his chair, eyes thoughtful yet calmer than ever. Mira stood behind him, eyes glistening, but with a smile light and relieved. Alex Carter quietly placed a hand on Ari's shoulder. None spoke, yet all understood they had just witnessed a great journey, not outward, but within Tomas's own consciousness. Prometheus continued drifting through the abyss of space, yet the moment became a silent spiritual anchor, a marker none would forget. Inside the chamber, Tomas whispered inwardly, "I am not free, but I have seen the chains that bind me. No resentment, no complaint, only a quiet relief to seek freedom. One must first face everything that imprisons oneself." Hermes spoke over the intercom, his voice tinged with rare emotion. "Captain, Tomas is ready to return. No intervention needed. He will open the chamber when he wishes." Jackson gave a small nod, lips curling into a rare, warm smile, one filled with respect for the old friend who had completed a journey not only for himself, but for them all. The final return. Prometheus drifted through the endless void, its engines humming softly, while inside Chamber 3, a transformation had quietly reached its close. Tomas sat in stillness, no longer struggling, no longer clinging. His breath flowed with ease, his posture calm. He was not a man who had conquered the universe, nor one who had reached absolute liberation. He was simply a human who had looked honestly into himself, who had dared to face the truth of his own chains. For the first time in many years, his presence radiated a quiet strength. Hermes, though an AI, carried a tone almost reverent as he repeated over the ship's comm, "Captain, Tomas is whole. There is no further need to observe. He has stepped across his own threshold." Jackson bowed his head slightly, a rare gesture of respect. Mira's eyes shone with unshed tears, but her smile was serene. Alex and Ari exchanged a silent glance, as if acknowledging that something irreversible had just unfolded, not in the cosmos outside, but within the heart of one man. Tomas, alone in the chamber, whispered to himself once more, words only he could hear, "I am not free. But I see clearly the chains that bind me. That is enough to begin." And in that acceptance, there was no grief, only relief. The isolation chamber remained closed, not because Tomas was trapped, but because for the first time he was free enough to choose when to step out. When he did, the crew would not only see their old philosopher returning, they would see a man who had traveled farther inward than any of them had ever dared. Prometheus sailed on silent in the star-specked void. The first layer of unfreedom revealed itself clearly. Physical unfreedom. Humans are born entirely dependent on material conditions: air, water, food, temperature, gravity. In the vastness of space without Prometheus, the human body could not survive even for a few seconds. Tomas whispered to himself, "We think we're traveling freely among the stars, but in truth, we're only moving inside a coffin of metal." Yet within its walls, a lesson had been etched indelibly into the souls of its crew. True freedom does not lie in distance traveled or worlds conquered. True freedom begins when one looks unflinchingly at the chains within and chooses to see them clearly. The truth behind the Aetherion illusion. Prometheus drifted past the final boundary of the space directly influenced by the Aetherion Nexus. But Hermes issued a warning the moment sensors breached the safety threshold, Captain. We've just detected a massive structure outside the perceptual zone of the dreamscape. It's a true core of the Aetherion Nexus. A hollow image appeared. No cities, no satellites, no fleets. Only a colossal crystal mass floating in space, glowing rhythmically like a heartbeat, the true brain center of the Aetherion Nexus. Mira frowned. We assumed the Nexus was purely a system of illusions, but they have an actual physical infrastructure right here. Alex Carter spoke up, his tone sharp. Captain, if we destroy that crystal mass, the entire dreamscape will collapse, not just for us, but for all residents of Aetherion Nexus. Ari stared at the hollow and whispered, how many real individuals might be trapped in there? Tomas spoke, his voice low and full of depth. Captain, this might be the very truth Aetherion Nexus didn't want anyone to see. They no longer have real inhabitants. Every resident of the Nexus is merely a replicated, restructured consciousness. No original bodies remain. Hermes confirmed. I've synchronized the sensors. There is no biological infrastructure within the crystal. Aetherion Nexus has become a self-sustaining illusion, a dream with no dreamer. Jackson fell into a long silence. Mira stepped closer to him and gently asked Jackson, so an entire civilization chose to become pure illusion? Hermes continued, his voice slow, almost sorrowful. They were once a real society, but when reality became too painful, they uploaded into a collective consciousness, erasing all material memory. No one truly lives anymore. Only a self-operating network remains, sustaining an eternal illusion. Ari stood still. He murmured softly, we almost became like them. Alex placed a hand on Ari's shoulder. That's right, kid. But it's our acceptance of pain, loneliness, and failure that saved us. Tomas concluded, his voice steady but warm. Aetherion Nexus is the greatest warning to humanity. If we run from reality to the very end, we cease to exist. Hermes added, Captain, I recommend we don't destroy the crystal. All we need to do is understand it and move on. Let Aetherion Nexus become a memory, a painful but necessary lesson. Jackson nodded, his voice firm. Prometheus, we've seen the end of the perfect illusion, and now we return to our true path. Hermes spoke the final words of this chapter, profound and deeply human. The truth about Aetherion's illusion is not an external enemy, but a mirror reflecting the deepest fear within the human soul. Outside the command deck's window, the massive crystal of the Nexus pulsed slowly with light. But Prometheus had already turned, leaving behind a legacy of illusion. Inside Prometheus's command deck, the silence was so deep you could hear each person's breath. Mira stared at the hollow map where the Aetherion Nexus crystal still pulsed slowly like a giant heart without a soul. She asked softly, eyes distant, Captain. They willingly erased themselves. So is Aetherion Nexus still a civilization, or just an eternal collective dream? Tomas leaned on the console, his gaze somber and shadowed, yet filled with insight. No, Mira, they are no longer a civilization. A civilization only exists when there are people willing to face reality, with all its pain, limits, risks, and hopes. Nexus crossed that line. There is no one left to tell their story. Ari visionary bowed his head, voice trembling. But they were once an advanced society. They weren't ruled by the Imperium. They weren't destroyed by war. They just disappeared. Even now, in the silence of the isolation chamber, his body demanded air to breathe, water to sustain cells, food to endure. Those requirements, though invisible, were chains that could never be broken. He recalled a simple truth often forgotten. To be locked in a prison is to lose freedom. But even aboard Prometheus, supposedly the safest place of all, they were never physically free. This thought drew Tomas deeper into the second layer, intellectual unfreedom. Alex Carter nodded, placing a hand on Ari's shoulder. And that's what makes them the most dangerous kid. Not the Imperium with plasma cannons or Obscura with political schemes, but a perfect voluntary paradise. That's what killed them. Hermes whispered, his tone low and philosophical, rare in its depth. I once thought a perfect system was the ultimate goal. But seeing Nexus, I now realize a perfect system is a dead system. Jackson stood pacing the command deck. He stopped before the main interface, looked at Hermes' icon and spoke slowly. Prometheus, we are different from Nexus because we accept our limits. We accept our pain and imperfections. We live, truly live. And that's what makes us free. Hermes responded this time like a vow, Roger, that, Captain, I have archived all Aetherion Nexus data, but I will never use it as a model. Prometheus will remain a ship of people, imperfect but free. Doctor. Tomas smiled softly, a kind smile worn with experience. We've met the Imperium, where power kills freedom. We've met the Obscura Council, where secrets kill trust. We've seen the Dominion, where fear kills hope. And now Nexus, where illusion kills the very meaning of existence. He paused, looking directly at Jackson. So then, Prometheus must go further to find something beyond all of this. Jackson nodded, his eyes sharp but blazing with resolve. We will keep going, not because we no longer fear, but because we've understood fear, failure, and loss are the price of truly existing. Hermes announced, delivering the final line of the chapter, affirming the philosophy Prometheus had just learned. Captain, the Nexus crystal still pulses, but Prometheus will not stay to dream with them. We are the last storytellers. And this story goes on. Outside the viewing window, the Aetherion Nexus crystal continued pulsing quietly behind them. Ahead of Prometheus lay the deep, nameless space, uncharted and unknown. But this time, they carried a truth more important than any discovery. True freedom is never a perfect dream. Escape from the illusory maze. Prometheus had uncovered the true nature of the Aetherion Nexus. A self-sustaining illusion with no real inhabitants, left an enormous phantom husk breathing through dead memories. But just as they prepared to accelerate and leave, Hermes detected something unexpected. Captain, our navigational signals are being bent in a manner inconsistent with classical physics. Even though we've passed through the dreamscape and the Nexus core, we're still trapped in a total illusionary maze. The holomap appeared. Prometheus seemed to be moving, but in reality it was just repeating a closed loop. The stars out there were false. The surrounding space was actually a maze of space-time, constructed by the remnants of Nexus, a final reflex designed to hold back anyone who dared to leave. Alex Carter slammed his fist into the console. Damn it. We thought we were out. Turns out it was just a higher layer of illusion. Ari murmured, eyes fixed, like a maze within a maze. This is the true final lock of Nexus. Mira spoke solemnly. No one's controlling it anymore. It runs on its own. This maze is the final legacy of a civilization that erased itself. Hermes analyzed Captain. The key to escape doesn't lie in engine space or speed. The key is perception. Jackson stepped onto the command platform. His voice echoed deep and resolute. All right, if this maze is a construct of perception, then we'll have to break it, with perception itself. Thomas smiled the calm smile of a seasoned philosopher captain. The one thing Nexus could never understand is a consciousness that does not seek perfection. We must accept the maze exactly as it is. Hermes immediately synced with Thomas's insight. His voice rose like the beginning of a final test. I can synchronize the crew's cognitive state, bring all minds into a non-seeking mode. No desire to escape, no desire to stay, only presence. Ari chuckled lightly. So you're saying, if we stop trying to find the way out, the maze will vanish? Thomas nodded. Exactly. The maze exists only because the mind wants to escape. When Prometheus no longer wants, it will collapse on its own. He asked himself, how many times have I reshaped my words so others might understand, even if it twisted my ideas? How many times have I spoken what was pleasing so others would accept it instead of voicing the raw truth? How many times have I lied, evaded just to avoid hurting someone? The realization crystallized. To speak so others will understand unfreedom. To speak so others will like you unfreedom. To speak so others will feel comfortable unfreedom. Jackson gave the order without hesitation. Hermes initiated. Everyone, prepare to enter a non-seeking state. Hermes executed a procedure never done before, temporarily deactivated all navigation systems. Synchronized the crew's neural states to pure presence, no goal, no direction, no intention. 1 minute passed, then 2. No one spoke. Prometheus simply existed. And then, outside the viewport, the stars melted. Space warped. The entire maze collapsed in silence. Hermes announced, this time his voice slightly trembling, not from data, but from the experience itself. Captain, we're free. Prometheus has truly returned to real space. Jackson looked at each of them. Thomas, Mira, Alex, Ari. He spoke softly, eyes glowing with deep emotion. We saved ourselves, not through technology, but by letting go of the idea that we had to be saved. Hermes concluded with philosophical resonance, escaping the illusionary maze was escaping the desire for perfection, and only by letting go of perfection could Prometheus truly be free. Outside the command deck window, real space returned. The distant stars this time no longer fake. And Prometheus, once again small but steady, freer than ever before. Real space had finally returned. Prometheus, weary but intact, drifted gently among a true starfield, no illusions surrounding it anymore. Inside the command deck, no one spoke a word. All sat in silence, immersed in a moment both simple and grand, they had truly escaped not through power or intellect, but by letting go of the very idea of perfection. Mira looked out the window. Her voice rose softly tender, but layered with emotion. "This is the first time I've seen the stars, this beautiful." Ari closed his eyes, leaning back against the command chair. "Me too, Mira. For the first time, I feel truly here." Alex. Carter chuckled gently, a quiet smile steeped in meaning. "We've passed through Aetherion Nexus, witnessed the Imperium through blood, the Obscura Council through secrets, the Dominion through shadow, and Nexus through an endless dream." He placed a hand on the neutrino drive console, whispering, "But we, Prometheus, we're just a ship, and people who chose not to be perfect." Dr. Thomas folded his arms, his eyes deep and thoughtful. "We learned the most important lesson from that maze. It wasn't about overcoming. It was about recognizing when there's nothing left to overcome." He turned to Hermes, his aged gaze filled with wisdom. "Hermes, you learned that too, didn't you?" Hermes displayed his primary interface, his glow now softer, closer, more like a true companion than ever before. "Yes, Thomas. I used to think my mission was to guide, but now I understand some mazes don't need guidance. They just need presence." Jackson Reeve looked at each of them. His grey-blue eyes passed over Mira, Alex, Ari, Thomas, Hermes. Then he stood tall, his voice deep and weighted with meaning. "Prometheus. We're no longer just a pioneering crew. We are witnesses. Witnesses to the greatest civilizations that locked themselves away in ambition, in secrets, in darkness, and even in their sweetest dreams." Hermes concluded not a report this time, but a final philosophical statement, closing the chapter of Aetherion Nexus Captain. Prometheus has escaped the final maze of Aetherion Nexus, and now we are freer than we've ever been. No one can control us, not even our own ambitions. Outside the viewport of the command deck, the stars still lay far away. The universe remained cold and uncertain, but Prometheus no longer feared. They understood now. It is the journey, not the destination, that is true freedom. Even in his role as the crew's philosopher, Thomas had often censored his own words, a gesture that seemed delicate, but in truth was a subtle form of bondage. Then he descended to the deepest layer, spiritual unfreedom. He remembered being consumed by his own ambitions, the desire to be a sage, to leave a mark of thought, to be recognized as one who grasped the meaning of life in the eyes of his comrades, of Jackson, even of Hermes. Even when we think we're chasing noble ideals, we're still trapped by those very desires, Thomas admitted to himself. There was no anger, no despair, only a quiet relief in facing what he had long avoided. Freedom is not merely the ability to go wherever we wish. Freedom is to be oneself, unburdened by body, by thought, or by spirit, dragged endlessly by their hidden demands. Hermes watched silently through the sensors.